Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to YWCA's Community Conversation. I'm Jessica Gershenfeld, and I am the Social Service and Social Justice Coordinator here at the YWCA. As a reminder to anyone who is new to these sessions, if you have any questions, please place them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll make sure to kind of look over those at the end of the discussion. I'm also going to be, right now I'm entering, there's a couple resources that are going to come up throughout the discussion. So I'm going to put them in the chat for anyone to save or, to look at and use how you would like. This week, YWCAs across the world are hosting special events, sharing information and stories, advocating, and more in participation with A Week Without Violence. For more than 20 years, the YWCA has set aside 1 week in October as A Week Without Violence in an effort to end violence against women and girls. In an effort to participate in this Week Without Violence, today we will be talking about human trafficking. We will define human trafficking, discuss the violence that women and girls endure in these horrific situations, and discuss the different human trafficking resources in Bucks County. One thing that I would like everyone to keep in mind during this social justice discussion is that women are a largely discriminated and oppressed group and are 5 times more likely than men to be human trafficked. At this time, I'd like to welcome our panelist, Stephanie Stiver. Sorry, Stephanie.
That's okay.
She has 13 years experience in case management and expertise in the social work and criminal justice field. She's worked at the Bucks County Youth Center as a youth counselor, where she grew her passion for social work and went on to continue her work with children and families in the child welfare system. She's been with NOVA since 2018 and has done great work as their human trafficking advocate. Welcome, Stephanie, and thank you so much for being a part of this discussion. And I think, I'll get into the first question because I know we have a lot to cover. I'd like for you to kind of define for our listeners what BCAT is, how you're involved with BCAT, maybe a short NOVA plug as well,
Sure.
kind of how these organizations serve the members of our community.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Jessica, for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Stiver, and I am the Human Trafficking Advocate at NOVA, which is the Network of Victim Assistance. I'm also a member of BCAT, which is the Bucks Coalition Against Trafficking. BCAT was established in 2013. Our mission is to eradicate human trafficking in Bucks County through victim identification, community education, enhancement of arrests and prosecution of traffickers, legislative advocacy, and a coordinated response of survivor services. So our coalition includes groups of professionals as well as community members. Anyone can join. And we are comprised of 4 subcommittees. So we have the Victim Focus Committee, the Community Outreach Committee, the Law Enforcement and Prosecution Committee, and our Legislative and Public Policy. So our victim focus group focuses on the prevention and intervention and rehabilitation for victims of human trafficking. It also concentrates on collaboration with existing organizations throughout the county to utilize available resources, as well as identifying unmet needs to effectively help victims. Our Community Outreach Committee focuses on educating the community about the prevalence of human trafficking in Bucks County. So this committee empowers the community to spread awareness and address demand and response to possible or potential trafficking situations. Our Law Enforcement Prosecution Committee, which is run and led by our District Attorney, Chelsea Jackman, who does our human trafficking. She focuses on training and empowering law enforcement, as educating law enforcement is so important in being able to identify victims. We're also trying to turn the tables of not having victims be seen as criminals, but be seen as victims, and need to focus on getting the traffickers and the buyers, as we call the John in this matter. And then our legislative and public policy focuses on identifying public policy issues and opportunities to influence legislative initiatives related to human trafficking, as well as educating the coalition and the community on any current proposed legislation. So So like I said, anyone can join. I do have in one of the resources down here, our Facebook page, as well as if you are interested in joining BCAT, you can contact, and I'll put the contact info down below, our co-chair, Julie Dugree, and I'll put her email address in there as well. And then as for NOVA, we are a victim service agency that offers a worldwide of services. So anyone who has been affected and who is a victim of human trafficking, as well as family members, we do offer free trauma counseling services, as well as my services as a victim advocate. Which mine is primarily is case management, whether it's starting from the very beginning and getting them to a safe place, setting long and short-term goals of what they want to accomplish to rebuild their life and start fresh and be able, to get back to having that normal life again. So it's a whole wide variety, and we'll go over resources later as well of what's available in Bucks County.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm looking now, did you say that your Facebook page was part of?
Did I put the, hold on, maybe not Facebook, I apologize. It would have been the website.
Yeah, that's fine, that's fine. Yeah, that's perfect.
You can find our information on our website at NOVA, which is www.novabucks.org.
Perfect. Great, well, thank you for that. I think next it would be an appropriate time to kind of go over Human Trafficking 101, which I know, at least from the little bit about it that I feel like I know a lot from just a little bit. So I know that there's a lot of information. So I'm hoping to kind of give a brief, as kind of 101 overview.
Absolutely. So obviously the biggest thing is human trafficking is a crime, and it involves the exploitation of a person for the purposes of compelled labor or commercial sexual acts through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. And those three words are very important because that is what identifies human trafficking versus prostitution. We do have individuals who do it on their own, who are not, forced into the human trafficking. So that's why I emphasize the force, fraud, or coercion, because one of those has to happen in order it to be human trafficking. The only time where that force, fraud, or coercion does not come into play is when it's the trafficking of a minor. So that's anyone under the age of 18. As long as there's some kind of commercial of, money, whatnot, then it's automatically human trafficking of a minor. So human trafficking affects individuals all across the world, including here in the United States, in our backyards here, right here in Bucks County, and is commonly regarded as one of the most pressing human rights issues of our time right now. As we call it, it is like a modern day slavery. Human trafficking affects every community in the United States across age, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic backgrounds. And, I'm going to if I refer a lot to, females in this, it's because 80% of the people who are being trafficked are women and children. Men and boys are trafficked. Unfortunately, the numbers are low because a lot of them don't report and, they're not being identified. Who we see as the populations that are most at risk of becoming a victim of human trafficking. With juveniles, we see the runaway youth, homeless youth, youth that's been involved in the foster care system, youth that has a background of sexual abuse. That's also youth involved in the criminal justice system. People who are trying to migrate in the US. So when I get in a second about our two types of trafficking, that's typically where we're going to see that labor trafficking. People struggling with addiction or in recovery, that is one of the biggest things in adults that we're seeing of how they're getting enticed to get into that, with the exploitation, everything is because our opioid epidemic. These traffickers take well advantage of that, and I'll go into that a little bit later. And victims of domestic violence, sexual assaults, political conflict, and social discrimination. So like I said, there are two types of trafficking that we see. We see sex trafficking and we see labor trafficking. Sex trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting of a person for the sole purpose of commercial sexual act, in which the commercial sexual act, again, is induced by that force, fraud, or coercion. Labor trafficking, same as the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, debt, bondage, or slavery. And a lot of times, regarding labor trafficking, it's a lot of how they're getting them here. And this is where we are seeing more of those international victims. They're trying to come from a different country. It's broken promises that they're told that it's going to be one type of work when they get here, and that's not the case at all. But human trafficking is the second most profitable and fast growing criminal industry in the world. And in case you wanted to know, number one is drug trafficking. So we have two horrible crimes that are happening that are bringing in the most money in the United States. The International Labor Organization estimated there are about 40.3 million victims of human trafficking globally. And it's estimated that forced labor and human trafficking is $150 billion identified and treated as prostitutes rather than victims of sex trafficking. And that is one of the biggest fights that we are trying to steer away from and see them as victims. These victims often go unnoticed by society because they're being hidden behind a widely socially accepted sex industry, whether that's in the strip clubs, in the hotels and whatnot. So commercial sexploitation, it is a hidden crime. It happens behind closed doors, like I said, in hotel rooms. We're seeing it in the illicit spas and the Asian massage parlors. Online, the big sites that we see, essentially it's almost like an online escort. As you guys may have been familiar, Backpage was the big page that got shut down, where the exploitation would happen. And now there's many more. The ones that we see today, the three big ones are skipthegames.com, listcrawler.com, and Mega Ads are the three big ones. So yeah, that is an overall of the definitions of what we see for human trafficking, the sex trafficking, and labor trafficking.
Thank you. And I think kind of piggybacking right off of that, what are, for people in the community, for other service providers who may not be familiar with this work, what are some of the signs that people should be looking out for or aware of to identify maybe, a victim of trafficking?
Absolutely. So you're going to see different forms that you can look, whether it's the work and living conditions of someone, the physical signs. So what we see in some of the signs is that they may have few or little to no possessions with them. They have no identification with them. They're not familiar with the area that they are currently in. They may be inadequately dressed for the weather or, due to having to work, as we know with the sex trafficking, they're wearing pretty skimpy clothes, and so they might not be dressed appropriately for the season that we may be in. They don't have control over their own money, as well as, like I said, identification. There's no financial records, or they don't have a bank account. Because a lot of the times, they may have cash, and a lot of times they have to give up any money that they have. They aren't able to speak for themselves. So this is one thing that we have been educating in our hospitals. When we were going in to educate emergency room departments, we're going to start going out to medical clinics, is that they will have someone, whether it's a trafficker or what we call, and excuse my term, but this is the term that it's called a bottom bitch, which means it's like the top lady of the trafficker, who will be with that person, will not allow that victim to speak. They will speak for them. They have to be present. They won't leave their side. So that's a big sign. They're going to be fearful or anxious around, their surroundings or around law enforcement, because unfortunately these women get brainwashed not to speak to anyone. They live in places that are degraded or unsuitable and horrible sleeping conditions. One big sign that we've been focusing on is suspicious tattoos and signs of branding. So what traffickers and pimps are doing is essentially they're making their mark on their victims. And it could be their name, it could be a symbol. The symbols that we see are dollar signs, diamonds, stars. They could be designed on the nails, jewelry, and that's their brand, to say that's my woman. They use another term, but I'll say the nice version, that's my woman. In regards to working and living conditions, they're not going to be free to go as they please. They're going to be paid or very little or unpaid at all. They will work excessive hours. This isn't your typical 8 to 5. Usually they're working long overnights, over 24 hours. They're not allowed breaks or works under unusual restrictions. Owes a lot of debt. I mean, these traffickers will pay for everything initially and are expecting these women to pay that debt, but where they will make quotas that they have to make. They don't make that quota, and this is what I'll get into later. This is where we're going to see that violence come into place of why, we're here today to talk about this. But these pimps make it nearly impossible for these women to pay off their debt, and this is why they stay and essentially keep them for so long. And the big thing is they're recruited for false promises, concerning the nature and of what, they're going to be doing or where they're going to be living. So what I always say is, if you see something, say something. It could be something absolutely stupid, but if you just have that gut feeling that something's not right, we have, which will be in the chat, the National Human Trafficking Hotline number. Call the number and report it, because I'd rather it be something that you may think is stupid, could be something real. So those are the, majority of the signs that we, advise to look for.
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like it's just kind of a cycle of this, manipulation and control. And I could be wrong about this, but I did one human trafficking training before, and they talked about kind of like, and this could be the wrong word actually. Is it, and you might even be talking about this in the next, is it like the priming? Grooming period. Okay. So are you getting into that in a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
So yeah, then I think we can move on to the next question. Kind of, we know that this manipulation and control and violence is part of this. And I guess kind of go a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah. So traffickers use a number of different ways, as we call it, to recruit their victims. And this is where that grooming phase come in. So I'm going to talk, because there's a difference essentially between juvenile victims and adult victims. So juvenile victims, like I said, these kids are, the children that we see are vulnerable. They usually have a past sex abuse history, are involved in foster care, physical abuse or whatever, maybe have absent parents, they've been in and out of foster care. So these are ones that we're going to see who are looking for attention, who just want love, someone they may have grown up and not had anything, possessions. So these people will be like, I'll buy you this. I will, I love you. I'm the only one who's going to care about you. And to build it, and they do it through, the biggest thing where we see what is through social media. Social media right now, as I say, is the devil when it comes to kids and, sex trafficking. And they essentially do that grooming to build that trust. And to when that trust is built, then they start isolating them away from any family members, any friends. So where they essentially have that person all to themselves. And then they take advantage. So all those gifts that they bought, vacations, expensive watches, money. Well, now that I give you all these things, now you're going to be doing this for me. And then that's when you see it. In regards to adults, the most common that we see is called what we call as a Romeo pimp. So this is ones who are going to pretend to romance their victims. And then, bill them, I love you, you're my boyfriend. So when we do find these victims, they're like, no, that's my boyfriend. I love him. And that's where that whole manipulation comes into play. But to that pimp, that was all fake. It's not real. And so they force them and manipulate them into the prostitution. And even once the prostitution has started, they still believe that that pimp is their boyfriend. Another way that we see is they lure them again with the false promises of a job. So you may have seen, let's see, on Craigslist as an example, oh, we're looking for models, we're looking for dancers. That's not what they're looking for. They come off of what the pay is going to be so great. And once you're in, now they got you and they forced you into doing, the sex acts for money. What I had said earlier about, our drug epidemic that we have going on, that is one of the biggest recruitment tactics right now. They will essentially get to know them, lure them in. They're going to buy their drugs for them initially. And that's where some of that debt will come into play, is with the drug money. So I'm going to example for heroin addicts. What they will do, essentially, they will have them do crack and cocaine in the morning to get them all throughout the day, set a quota. Let's say, for example, you have to do 10 days, and then I will get your bundle of heroin. They will even go so far that they will withhold the drugs so that they are dope sick, and force them to do it. And they feel like they have no choice because they're so dope sick that, all right, well, I have to do this. And once they do it, then they get their dope. So they take to advantage with the, the drug epidemic right now. But the most horrible one that we see is what we call a guerrilla pimp. These are ones who are the most violent and brutal and beat their women. They will kidnap them, beat their victims into submission until they agree to have sex with strangers. They don't do a certain number of quotas a day. They're getting essentially the crap beat out of them. Black eyes, face. If it's not them doing it, like I said, it's their bottom lady, who will take care of it. And essentially then that woman feels stuck in there because now that guerrilla pimp is making threats not only to her, but to her family. If that woman has children, I'm going to go kill your kids. I mean, they're horrible. And that's the manipulation factor that we see to hold them in. And then in regards to juveniles, we have other juveniles who are recruiting other kids in schools now. So you have a juvenile who's already in the life and is now recruiting other members in school to join, or that pimp will go on that juvenile's Facebook page and recruit friends that way. It's a horrible cycle that we see, and the manipulation is just absolutely terrible. But so traffickers like to brag about the life that they have. And I want to read to you a quote that was on that's on a pimp's website. This specifically teaches others how to be pimps and the violence that is used. So there is some negative term for the word bitch. So because there's so many, I'm going to say B as to be, polite about it. But this is the quote that it gets an understanding of what's in their mind as how it's okay to be violent towards women. A true pimp is someone who gets a B to love her pimp. Need her pimp, she can leave at any time if she wants to, but she won't, because life without her pimp is the darkest place in the world for a B. She needs her pimp to feel complete. She needs her pimp to eat, to breathe, and to live. Everyone always thinks the pimp keeps a B in check using a backhand. There are times when you're going to need to smack a B or choke a B if she gets out of line. Some Bs need to be physically dominated in order to submit to her pimp. And if so, so be it. You got to do what you got to do. But you cannot be a pimp by simply getting angry every time and smacking your B. You have to get inside of her head. A B that will break her back making you money is a B that is in love with you. A B that does not want to disappoint you. A B that wants to make her daddy happy. If you go around smacking her all the time, you become the problem instead of the rock. Bs need to fear disappointing you, but more importantly, they need to desire to make you happy. That's the mentality that traffickers and pimps have, and encouraging others to do so. So traffickers control their victims by breaking them down psychologically and developing control over them in a combination of artificial infection, intense manipulation, addictive substances, cruel violence, and emotional abuse. And as a result, many of these victims become trauma bonded to their traffickers. They become robbed of any free choices. And in case you're not familiar with what trauma bonding is loyalty to a person who is destructive. While the idea of bonding tends to bring up, of something of good and beneficial, this trauma bonds are unhealthy. So where I was saying how like they see their pimps as their boyfriend and the lovers, but we know that they're not. So some victims may fear leaving, obviously, like I said, for a number of reasons. Fear of physical violence and threats to self and their children or family by the pimp. They're feeling shame, feeling of isolation and low self-esteem, the drug addiction, psychological trauma as a result of a chronic abuse and manipulation. And traffickers often convince victims that they are outside the law and can never seek protection from police. And most victims have trauma-related bonding to the trafficker known as the Stockholm Syndrome. And again, if you're unfamiliar with that, that is the psychological phenomenon when strong emotional ties develop between two people where one person intermittently harasses, beats, threatens, abuses, or intimidates the other. And the victim expresses that empathy and sympathy and positive feeling towards their captors, and sometimes to the point of even defending them and identifying them. And we've seen that multiple times that, they've arrested a trafficker and that victim essentially becomes uncooperative and defends, that trafficker for what he's done. And these feelings are generally considered irrational in light of the danger or risk endured by the victims who essentially, mistake a lack of abuse from their captors for an act of kindness, that person took me in, he gave me my drugs, he loved me, he bought me clothes, he bought me gifts. So, trafficking is happening all over Bucks County. And where we are seeing it is typically in the lower Bucks and the Bensalem, Bristol area. We have many hotels there, as well as many major traffic routes. We have the Hot Turnpike, we have I-95, Route 13, and Route 1. So as many traffickers will move around from hotel to hotel and state to state. So yeah, I mean, it's hard. And when I, get new cases and, I've seen the violence that has happened, it's terrible. And it's hard. It's hard to be able to have a victim understand, and it takes a long time to have them understand what truly they've endured because of that, trauma bond that they've had to their traffickers.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone can relate, but just, it's sickening just hearing that quote that you read, even aside from all the other things. And it's just, it's eye-opening because I think a lot of people think that things are just lovely and great in Bucks County, but these things are happening, and it is very violent. So I want to finish up with kind of the last point that Stephanie and I discussed talking about, but there is one question in the chat that I think it's a double question, but it might be better to touch on that before getting into this last part. So is that okay with you, Stephanie?
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, it's a two-part question. The first part says, can you see it too? Do victims of human trafficking self-identify as a victim of a crime and ask for help immediately? So we'll answer that one first.
Yeah, absolutely. So majority of the time, no, they do not identify themselves as victims. Like I was saying before, a lot of them do, if law enforcement gets involved, do become very uncooperative. Because again, they were manipulated and essentially, their mind tricked that you don't talk to law enforcement, or anyone in this matter, even for people that are trying to help them. There are times that they do. Some women get to the point where they're like, I am done. I went out, I need help. So, but majority of the time, no, they do not self-identify themselves as victims and don't ask for help. And I mean, if law enforcement gets involved, and we get them out of the situation, and we can get them to a safe place, majority of the time, they either do eventually go back into it, either because they are not able, it's hard for them to function in the real world, especially trying to have a job where they're making $1,000 a night and you're working at McDonald's making $7.25 an hour. And so a lot of them do go back because it is quick money. But I would say it's about 80% don't self-identify, where 20% do.
Yeah, and I think I could imagine that they're just terrified and don't even realize that they're terrified to say anything about it to anybody,
Right.
because of the violence that you were talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the second part says, why is physical violence not involved in human trafficking cases? So I'm not sure if this person means, like, does the violence evidence not come up in human trafficking cases? How did you read it, Stephanie?
I'm actually was going to question. I wasn't quite sure of the question, so I don't know if that person can clarify a little more.
It's anonymous, so I'm not
Oh, okay.
who said it, but if you ask this question and you could give a little clarification, I think we can get it answered for sure.
Yes, because I would love to answer your question. Just need a little clarity.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, then we'll move on to our last piece, and if that gets clarified, we can go back to that. And again, for all panelists, we do have all attendees, we do have a good amount of time if there are other questions. So I know the YWCA, in partnership with other victim service providers, recently received funding for supportive services of victims, to provide supportive services to victims of human trafficking. And I know, not me personally, but I know some of my colleagues here have been really excited about that. And
I am so excited about it.
Work on it. So it's, that's in the works. So that's a positive thing. And I think if you could just tell us a little more about other kind of human trafficking courses or initiatives happening, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. So actually BCAT, we just did, actually last Friday on the 16th, we just did a hotel outreach. So members of BCAT, we primarily focus on the lower Bucks hotels, but we had a group that did the hotels up in Quakertown by the, why can't I think about that? This is terrible. Maybe I need more coffee. The Turnpike, there's the word I was looking for. So thank you, Teresa. I could not think of the word for the life of me. The Turnpike entrance. Because again, that's being the main routes. That's where you're gonna see a lot of them. It's quick exit, quick in for traffic to come in and out. And what we did is we would go into the hotels, we would meet with the hotel managers and the staff, and discuss with them and provide information to them on obviously the local global problems of human trafficking and what they can do to help obviously eradicate it, because it's coming into their hotels. Now, some of these hotels are a lot of your more sketchers where we're seeing it, where unfortunately sometimes hotel staff are part of the problem because they are essentially, if you want to call it, receiving a cut of any money that's coming in. But we get really good responses from the hotels and wanting to ensure and, giving them what signs that they should be looking for, especially housekeeping. I mean, they're the ones who are going into the rooms and can see any kind of evidence or sign that this is happening and knowing then to report it. Mm-hmm. So that was something big that we just did. Also in Bucks County, we have created a child sex trafficking task force. So we do it on an MDT and multidisciplinary level, which consists of district attorneys, law enforcement, children and youth, juvenile probation, myself as the human trafficking advocate, and as well as our child advocacy center where we do our forensic interviews of children, as well as the medical professionals. So we have a doctor who is from, I think it's from CHOP. CHOP, in case you're not familiar, CHOP and St. Chris have two specialty child abuse programs. So that's what their specialty is. So we have a doctor who's part of that team who can help with our medical piece. And the purpose of this is we're creating protocols to handle child sex trafficking cases. So when one is identified, that we have protocols in place of who's going to be working with the child, what help, what resources. So now we have brought in outside community resources through mental health, drug and alcohol, any other programs that work with youth to be a part of it so that we can give the proper resources to get that child whatever help that they may be. And so a couple of numbers that I wanted to provide, and I can type them up in the chat. So I wanted to provide, if you know of someone or you ever want to provide where they feel like they need services, we have myself, my agency, Nova, as well as a Women's Place. They also have a human trafficking advocate as well. Our Nova hotline number is 1-800-675, I cut off my numbers, 675-6900. And then Women's Place hotline number is 1-800-220-8116. But what I would suggest is if you see something, like I said, say something. The National Human Trafficking Hotline number, which is 1-888-373-7888. You can call and make an anonymous tip. You provide every information possible, and that hotline will disperse the proper information, whether it needs to go to law enforcement, a victim agency, or wherever, to wherever, you know, that information needs to go to. So that's what we have going on. I mean, we're continuing the fight. I mean, the biggest thing is that actually, so Amber Galtz is the human trafficking advocate at A Woman's Place. Her and I work very closely on obviously this fight. The biggest thing right now is continuing with education and trainings, not only to the community to recognize it, but the professionals as well. Yeah. Mental health, drug and alcohol, our hospitals, before Corona happened, when we were out and about doing a lot of trainings, we were working with our hospitals here in Bucks County about creating their own protocols as to if a victim potentially comes in, what their protocols would be to be able to identify and what to do with that. So the biggest thing is education, and our law enforcement agency, you know, then that's where we've done training videos, because they're on the forefront. They're seeing it when calls are coming out. They patrol those hotels. So yeah, it's a fight that is continuing every single day.
And I think the fight is growing.
Very much.
All right, we have 2 questions. So
yeah.
I don't think we got clarification on the first one yet, but
okay.
Oh, okay. Someone did clarify. So we'll get
to
there
we go.
So let's go over here to, someone put one in the chat. It says, how many cases do you have per year, and how many of these result in the abusers being jailed? What happens to the victims in these cases? And Stephanie, I know you can do the questions. I'm just reading it out loud so it's easier.
Yeah.
Everyone.
No, it's all good. So, all right. Was that in the chat section?
Yeah, so that one was in the chat.
All right.
How many?
Oh, here we go. Okay, perfect. Just so I can visualize it.
Yeah.
So the number of cases I have per year, maybe 10 to 20. I mean, 20 is like the high ebb, and usually that's just getting some resources out to someone. That's not doing necessarily full case management. I think definitely with us educating a lot more, because when I first started, there weren't many, because, you know, they just weren't being identified. And now that we've been doing a lot more education, we definitely have been identifying a lot more juvenile victims, as well as adult victims as well. So the numbers are increasing, and I get them at different points of whether literally they just got pulled from a hotel to where they've already been out and maybe they've been homeless. So they need help with like housing, a safe place to go. Which I wanna actually, one resource that I do wanna provide is that Bucks County has an amazing program. It's called The Well. It's a housing residential program for women. They can hold up to 6 women who are victims of trafficking, to essentially be able to rebuild their lives, have a safe house. It's an undisclosed location. They get trauma counseling. They get to learn how to have a job again, to where you can be up there for about 2 years, and essentially in hopes of being able to move, getting your own apartment, getting your own job, and starting over again. So we are very lucky to have The Well, to have that resource available.
Yeah.
So I want to answer the other part of Helen's question was, and how many of these result in abusers being jailed? Well, okay. So I'm going to start with in regards to child victims, because again, you don't need to have that force, fraud, or coercion, which is what is needed to be able to, in the criminal level, to be able to prove in court. Right. So when we have our child victims that don't need to have that level, we have had very successful cases where the traffickers have gotten 20 to 40 years in jail. So that's trafficking of a minor. In regards to adults, it has been difficult because, again, you know, these victims have been manipulated and brainwashed not to talk to law enforcement. Again, you know, that trauma bonding where they see their traffickers as, you know, their lovers. So a lot of the times, unfortunately, victims do become very uncooperative when it comes to investigations and going through the criminal justice process, plus of how long it takes. It can take well over a year from the time an arrest happens to the time a sentencing happens. And during that time period, a lot of times, unfortunately, trying to keep a victim engaged in that time period is very hard as well. So we've had successful results in prosecuting traffickers, but definitely not enough.
Not enough.
So we're continuing to try and continue to work on that.
Yeah. And then I think Helen also said what happens to the victims in these cases. So I guess if their abusers are jailed, and I would think that there's other people in line that kind of take over what.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting services directly in place. I mean, I will say, so the DA, just Chelsea Jackman, who's our district attorney, who handles a majority of our human trafficking cases. Her and I have a really great working relationship where we've also have built, really great relationships with our law enforcement. So anytime that they even suspect that there is someone, they're calling me right away and I'm going down and meeting with that victim. To essentially do like a trafficking assessment so that we can get them services right off the bat for them and get them to a safe place. And a lot of times I do have called out to a woman's place, Amber, because they have, now unfortunately our program doesn't have it, their grant has the ability of helping assist with housing and getting them to a safe place, because unfortunately there aren't really shelters that we have on an emergency basis. So if it means getting a woman out, a victim out, we may have to put them up in a hotel, like obviously away from where they were, just to keep them safe until we can come up with a plan.
Yeah.
But we do everything in our power to make sure that they are safe but that they want to have it, and if they're not ready, we tell them it's okay, but they have our contact information and know when they are ready, they can contact us.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move over to a question from Pat Rooney. It says, Ben Salem and Bristol are relatively small. How are the traffickers laying below the radar for police?
So it's not that they're necessarily laying below the radar. When it comes to an investigation, or if there's, suspecting that it's happening, there's a whole process involved with it. And, unfortunately, I can't get into much of how that's about, but I can just let you know that when someone is suspected, I mean, they're being watched, but they have to be able to build a case and it has to be done. It's one of those, you get one shot at it. Otherwise they could flee, or they get away with it. Mm-hmm. So they know the target hotels that we see. But again, it's people continuing to report if they see something suspicious that we can get them out there right away.
Yeah. Okay, there's actually a couple more, which is good. I'm glad about that.
Awesome. I like questions.
Yeah, I know. This is okay, let's circle back to that original question. So
Oh, yes.
They said what I mean was physical or psychological violence to force someone into labor or services or into commercial sex acts is considered a human trafficker. So my question was, does physical violence have to be involved in human trafficking cases?
No, it does not.
Right.
No. And like I said, when you have that Romeo pimp, those Romeo pimps are not being physical. They're not being physical. And if they do, it might be, not to a point where they're punching them and black eyes and knocking them out or killing them.
Right.
But no, it does not need to be a part of someone being trafficked.
Helen asked, do you ever go to schools to educate the kids so that they can help report abusers or at least be aware of the issues?
So actually part of NOVA, we have education programs that do go into the schools. And actually we were supposed to be starting a pilot program, starting with the high schoolers especially. And then lovely COVID happened and that got put on hold.
Put everything on hold.
So I know everything got put on hold. So it is in the works. I know when we do go to our schools already where we do education on, the sexual abuse stuff, we have to tread very carefully because we also have to go off of what the school will allow us to do. We have proposed to schools before about wanting to educate to the level that they can understand. And we've actually gotten some pushback. So we do bring it up, but have to tweak it of how we word it. But we're hoping to get that pilot program started of going into the high schools to give a more formal education to them.
Yeah, it's very touchy and you want them to know the signs to look for.
Yeah.
I guess without,
It's hard because it's like they need to know, but when you go to school saying, it's like, okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, this question from Pat Rooney says, how are the Johns recruited to have sex with a trafficker? So
they're responding to the ads. So when I'm saying that those three big ones that I said, the skip the games, list crawler, the mega ads, they're responding to ads. I mean, it's demand. So what I say is if we can break the demand, human trafficking can go away. But unfortunately, with it being second highest, building industry of money, and unfortunately, and especially if they're talking ever about making prostitution legal, I guarantee you that's going to go way up in numbers. So it's not essentially that the Johns are being recruited. These are people who want to buy sex.
Right. Okay, when victims are identified, what are you seeing as their greatest needs?
Oh, a safe place. That's obviously number one. That's why I'm so excited for your program and everything that's coming up, because that's been the biggest struggle. We get that call at 4:00 and they need a safe place. I mean, thank God that, Amber and AWP has that housing program. Calling around to shelters, all of them are always full.
Right.
Even it is hard, even just when they're being taken out of a hotel situation and we're saying, hey, we're going to put you in a hotel for a night. We get nervous about it, but if it means that's the only thing that we have right now. So housing is definitely a number one factor of getting them to a safe place and being able to then get that treatment that they need. A lot of times when we do, come across victims, like again, a majority of them have a drug and alcohol, issue already, and they're addicted. So we'll try and get them assessment ASAP to get them into treatment. And, then they'll be in a safe place for the time being. But housing is number one that we have the biggest with of getting.
Yeah, because none of the other things can fall into a place really unless that's under control.
Yep.
Okay, next, there's two more. Do we have statistics for
the famous question of statistics? God, I wish I could give you a number for that. Statistics are really hard to do just because so many are not reported or underreported. But what I can do is I have some people I can talk to try and get a statistic number for you, and I can always send it to Jessica. And Jessica, I don't know if you can then send that out later.
Absolutely.
But statistics are really hard to get right now for trafficking and how many cases that there are. If you are interested in more, not just Bucks County, but Pennsylvania. So one of the sites that I put on there, it's called the Polaris Project. They have a lot of great information. They can give statistics about Pennsylvania. So you can see like how many were prosecuted. You can see about how many cases that were reported to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So Polaris is a good place if you kind of want to see more of a United States by state, but it's hard to say just for Bucks County alone.
And then the last question, I think I can probably answer.
Go for it.
Force, blank, and coercion. I didn't catch the middle word, and I know that it's fraud. Right?
Yes, it is fraud. That is correct.
I'm saying it. I'm like, oh my God, did I say the right word?
You did. Good job.
I learned something. So, there's one more that just, someone said, what can the community do to help?
Absolutely. I mean, if this is something that you really want to get involved in, I would definitely recommend. Oh, and can we put that email address up, Jess?
Yeah.
So get involved with BCAT. It is such a great coalition. It's about fighting the fight, going out, doing outreach and educating other community members. Julie Dugry, who is our co-chair at BCAT, is our contact person. Her email is Julie, Julied. So Julie D at novabucks.org. And if you want to join, feel free to email Julie and we'll be happy. She'll let us know when our next meetings are. We meet Victim Focus. Typically we were meeting every month or every other month. Obviously with COVID, we're doing Zoom meetings right now. but yeah, or if you want more information about BCAT, you can definitely contact Julie.
Was there another email address that you wanted me to put besides Julie's?
No, because she's our best. I mean, normally if she was in the office, I would give the office number, but we're all working remotely right now, so that's probably the best way. And if you want, you can put my email address too, Jess. Anyone can feel free to email me
Sure.
or call me with any questions. So mine's just at stephanie@novabucks.org.
All right, well, I think that's it for the Q&A. I want to thank you again for being a part of this. I think it's very important to kind of spread this information, and in kind of not partnership, but going in line with our Week Without Violence. I think it's a very important thing to discuss. And I know the YWCA is really excited to work with you and all the other service providers.
Yes, you as well.
That we're doing moving forward. So, as always, for everyone, we are available for questions. I put the 2 email addresses that we were just discussing in the chat for further questions. Sorry, I was just reading a Q&A. Thank you, Pat.
Thanks, Pat.
Yeah, and I hope that everyone has a great rest of their Wednesday. Thanks again, Stephanie.
Be safe out there, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.